Welcome back to Hey Kentucky. Now that we've had the election, we've had a recanvass, we can put a bow on this whole election season because we can now finally move forward. We know who the next governor is, all of that. So to talk about what really is next, let's bring in Louisville Courier-Journal's Joe Sonka. He's all in the know with this sort of thing. So Joe, first of all, just tell me, we kind of all knew that the recanvass wasn't going to amount to a different result in the election. Were you surprised, not surprised that Governor Bevin decided to stop it there?
Personally, I was a little surprised. If you looked at his rhetoric the day before in an interview, if you look at him promoting a press conference the day before where some of his supporters were making kind of some conspiracy theories about the vote being hacked and various forms of fraud, I really thought that he was going to contest it to the legislature. And some Republican legislators also were really worried that he wasn't going to concede either. And this was going to be a fight in the legislature where he was asking legislators to overturn the election in a way. But it turns out he didn't. And this could have been a very hectic couple of weeks here and until the inauguration. But it turns out we're not going to have to go through that as Bevin decided to concede the race.
Well, there was a lot of talk leading up to the election and even during, the recanvass period where Republicans were kind of making comments that they weren't going to be working with Andy Beshears on things. And then once this is all over, there seemed to be a real spirit of bipartisanship. How long do you think that's going to last?
Maybe a few days. Basically, right before the election, you had Republican Senate President Robert Stivers and Republican Senator Damon Thayer saying that Beshears' main plan to add new revenue to increase funding for public education, which is legalizing casinos, was dead on arrival, and it just wasn't going to happen. So now you have Andy Beshears taking over the governor's mansion, but you have Republican supermajorities in both chambers, and if Republicans pass a bill that Governor Beshears doesn't like, he can veto it, but it only takes 51 votes in the Senate and a majority in the House to overturn that veto. So in terms of legislation, he doesn't have a lot of power, but he does have control over 11 executive branch cabinets. He can make some executive orders. So he's not totally powerless. He does control so much of the executive branch, but it's definitely going to come down to whether he can get along with the Republicans in the Kentucky General Assembly, and that remains to be seen. It'll probably look all nice and cozy for the first week, everyone getting along. But once you gavel into the session, it may be a different story by then.
So what do the first couple of months of Andy Beshears' administration need to look like so that voters think that they got what they voted for?
Well, Beshears made a lot of promises in terms of giving teachers a raise, in terms of increasing the funding for public education. But of course, that's going to require money. And he has to present a budget to legislators in late January where he's going to give his priorities for where that money should go, where the money should come from, and how much revenue there's going to be. And unless he's able to identify new revenue and the Republicans in the legislature actually create that revenue, whether that be casinos or raising certain taxes or finding new revenue streams, it's going to be really hard for Beshears to fulfill a lot of those promises. So a lot of it, again, is going to come down to how well he is able to engage with Republican legislators and how much Republican legislators are willing to give on his end. So they could either compromise or they could fight. And if you know politics, it's usually kind of weighs towards the fighting, but we'll see.
Well, and at some point they may come to some sort of agreement, but this gaming issue is not going to be an easy one for Beshears to get through. So what are his other options if he doesn't get that through? Like, where else is he going to get the money? Is it just from a tax increase?
Well, so casinos may not happen this year, maybe by the end of Beshears' term. But what could happen is sports gambling. I think there's a much greater chance that Republican legislators could go along with that. Now that doesn't creates much less in revenue than casinos would, but it is something. Beshears also talked about medical marijuana, doing a constitutional amendment and then taxing that. I don't know if that's going to be a big winner among Republicans in terms of taxing medical marijuana. In a few years down the road, we may finally see a medical marijuana bill, maybe when all the other states around us have that, or something recreational marijuana. That's probably going to be years down the road after that. So there aren't a lot of options. And then once you run out of options, you have to get into taxes. And raising taxes in the state legislature is extremely difficult. So it's going to be a difficult road no matter what, and trying to find new revenue to go towards public education, to fund pensions, which one thing Governor Bevin did do is he set a priority of fully funding public pensions after a decade of underfunding. So that's kind of the precedent that's been set, that you have to spend a lot of money to pay for those public pensions. And Beshears also made promises for other areas. So it's all going to come down to him and the Republicans coming up to some kind of agreement, which could be hard.
All right, Joe Sonka of the Louisville Courier-Journal, thank you so much for your insight. We always appreciate having you on the show.
Thanks, Mary Jo.
All right, more Hey Kentucky right after this.